as we begin, I just want to ask, does anybody anticipate any distractions with our time together? We don't have much time together, and I'm just curious if you anticipate distractions either on your computer with notifications or email or web pages or social media, or even in the room or physical environment that you're in. Does anybody anticipate any distractions during our time together? Great. Awesome. I'm seeing a lot of head shaking. So I'm so glad that you're with us. If you can be with your video on, it helps all of us to stay engaged. If you're like me and you don't always like watching yourself, you can do the hide yourself view. In fact, I'm gonna do that right now so I don't have to look at myself talking. That's no fun. But if you can show your picture and your video, it goes a long way in helping all of us stay engaged. So thank you very much for that. How I thought we would spend our time together is doing just the briefest recap of the teaching video that you all received. And as I'm doing that, we're going to stop along the way to do some chats. And by chat, I mean breakout groups. I'm going to actually put us into groups, and we're going to just debrief together. Hey, I heard this. I heard this. This is what I get of that. I don't understand this. Everything's fair game. And it'll be really great then to report back to the larger group and hear how those conversations went. So let me just sort of hop in here and just do a little recap. We talked a lot in the video that you had the chance to watch that new stories start with better questions. And I just think one of those better questions is, you know, moving from how do we fix people and how do we fix somebody's relationship with money to like, how do we help people have a healthier relationship with money, and how can our ministry environments in our ministry context shape some of that? I talked in the video a lot about this technical versus adaptive framework. And if you recall from the teaching video, technical problems are actually really easy to identify. They're based on expertise. They're clear roadmap, really straightforward. But adaptive, on the other hand, is it's a completely different animal altogether. Adaptive challenges are undefined. They're easy to avoid. They require like new values, new ways of looking at the world, and there's almost always an underlying emotional system. So we talked to technical and adaptive challenges, and adaptive challenges really are about leadership and culture and personal growth and the stuff that I actually call ministry. And I didn't make this up. This is from Ron Heifetz, who does his work out at Harvard and wrote some really great books that are worth checking out: Adaptive Leadership and Leadership on the Line. The way that it applies to what we're doing here in this video and in our work in stewardship and discipleship is this idea that applying quick fix technical solutions to adaptive challenges can make problems worse. And so sometimes, not always, but what I'm coming with or the perspective I'm coming from is that budgets and spending plans and debt plans and, you know, the cold hard logic of making numbers add up, you know, even to an extent, sermons and lectures, these things have their place. Of course they have their place. But when we take an adaptive mindset, we're looking at what is the actual things that I need to change about what I believe and to make progress on having a healthy relationship with money. And if I first frame the quest as being healthy in my relationship with money, then my observation has been that the things like having a plan for debt and budgeting, we can actually use those to help us have a healthier relationship with money. So I'm going to, you know, do a recap of the 3 new approaches to cultivating generosity, but those are really predicated on this question of technical versus adaptive. And so what we're going to do in our breakout groups is I'm just going to ask you in your groups, where do you see the technical versus adaptive framework in your life, in your ministry, maybe even in your family? Where do you observe this framework on how sometimes problems aren't what they appear to be, that there's an underlying sort of challenge to the whole thing? And so maybe if you have the chance to come jot down this question, where do you see technical versus adaptive? And then I'm going to put us into groups, and for 10 minutes, we'll be in breakout groups for 10 minutes. There's going to be about 3 or 4 people per group, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning before we come back. And so it won't be a surprise. You'll know that the group is ending. When you get into your group, of course, if you need to reintroduce yourselves to one another, a reminder of where you're from and your ministry context, and see where the conversation takes you. And then when we come back to the large group, I'll ask you a little bit of, what'd you hear? What'd you talk about? What were some of the ideas that emerged? So we're gonna jump in now. I've got 4 breakout rooms set up. They're gonna be assigned automatically. So I'm not choosing who's in each room. It'll be a little bit random, but that's what makes it fun. So you'll have the opportunity to interact with people from around the Moravian Church. So we'll get going now. Let me know if you have any questions, but we'll see you in about 9 or 10 minutes. All right, friends, welcome back. I am dying to know what came up in your conversations. Where did those conversations take you? Would anybody be willing to report out for their group? Where that conversation went for you?
Well, I can start.
Go ahead, Thelma.
One of the places our conversation went was in terms of the adaptive challenges. What is the church going to look like post-pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right. Because I like that, Thelma. What will the church look like as we come out of the pandemic? And it's so easy to get technical about it. Will we do services? How much in person? All those things. But like, there's underlying things, new and emerging questions. Thank you, Thelma. Maxine, you came off mute as well. Do you want to hop in there?
Yep. So we talked maybe a little bit about both. So for some of us, we're into the stewardship campaign, writing a letter, presenting the budget. How do we get away from that technical way of approaching? For me, I'm on the Canadian Moravian Foundation. Yeah. So we have a pool of money and we use the interest on that to support projects within the Canadian district churches. So I got onto that committee team because it was supposed to be an easy 3 meetings a year. This is what we do. But I've learned since that probably one of the things we should be doing is growing the base. And for me, when the idea of growing the base, when we're getting 0.05% interest, just seems like a waste of money. So I feel like I'm in the wrong place.
Do you feel like you're in, just so I can understand, you're in the wrong place because there's more work to be done and than what the time allows?
Well, no, primarily, how do I say this? Primarily, it's that I don't feel if growing the base is what we're called to, what this team is called to do. I don't feel that's where I'm being called if it means people are setting aside their money to do nothing.
Okay. Yeah. It's helpful. Okay. Thanks, Maxine. I appreciate that. Linda, I'd be curious, in the intro, you talked about getting away from the word stewardship. Just be interested in hearing you, reflect for us, what that's like from a technical versus adaptive standpoint.
Oh boy. So I don't know about other congregations. I can only speak for my own, but and my past experience in church settings is that when people hear that word stewardship, they kind of go,
Yeah.
My goodness, they're asking for more money again.
Yeah.
And so Gary Marsh, who is a retired Moravian pastor, did a series called 6 Words to Live By. And we have been using those 6 words, and I am not going to remember them all, but one of them is give, which is the stewardship part, but there's connect, and there's, like I said, maybe Sue could help me with what they are. So that's where we've been trying to put a whole different slant on it, that giving is a part of the whole, is a part of being a disciple.
Sure.
So it's not just focusing on the giving, it's trying to encompass it within a within a bigger picture.
Okay,
Does that
that's
answer your
helpful.
question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I totally put you on the spot there, and I appreciate that, Linda. Thanks for bringing that up. The journey of reframing stewardship and getting away from just purely asking for money, and like more about like, this is about growth. This is about discipleship. This is about becoming who we're becoming. That's super helpful. Matthew, I'd be curious on your reflections on this topic and in your ministry context.
I don't know too much to say, but just a little bit about our church. We're fortunate that financially we're in really good shape. And what's interesting is during the pandemic, our giving has increased year over year. And 2020 we took in more than we did in 19. We're taking in more this year than we took in last year, which baffles me because we've got about half the number of people in person. Now they're watching online, obviously, but our financial stewardship is quite healthy, which has really surprised me through the pandemic, that people are still very much engaged somehow. They may not be here in person, but they're still engaged, just sending in their money.
Well, thank you, Pastor Matthew. I appreciate that. Well, before we move on, I just want to do open call, like before we move on, and this is foundational to where we go from here, this technical versus adaptive, because what I'm going to do now is start to think about money as an adaptive challenge. So I'm curious, anybody have any examples or any thoughts or questions before we move on and we start to think about adaptive solutions? Okay. Well, here we go. So in the video, as you saw in the teaching video, you saw there's 3 new approaches. And one of those was to think about values as a tool, right? Values is a tool, and a tool, of course, is something we can leverage to do we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And we use it automatically. It's a lens to see the world, all the better if it's written down, right? And so that's one of how we can start with an adaptive approach. We don't start with budgets. We start with values, those core principles that guide our decisions. And so as I go through the teaching video here, this is what we looked at. We talked about this. I'm just gonna go back here. We do this as organizations, as ministries. we have strategic planning meetings or retreats where maybe it reveals our core values, and maybe your church or ministry has some core values that you apply to your budgets. We do this for organizations. And so I asked, why don't we do this for individuals too? So here's where I want to go with this in our next round of breakouts. So 8-9 minutes on this topic. How can churches, ministries help people discover their values? So that's where we'll go in these next breakout rooms. We're going to recreate them. So you're with a new group of folks. We're going to get an opportunity to get to know other people. And so here we go. Back to the groups. I'll put the chat prompt, the question in the broadcast again, and we'll go from there. Back. We asked the question, how can churches and ministries help people discover their values? Very, very curious. What ideas, what practical ideas did you all end up sharing with each other? is anybody willing to just hop in there and give us a little bit of like context for what you said in your conversation?
There are tools you can use in the church for helping a person to find out what their talents are and what they can maybe put to use for the service of the church.
Yeah. What are some of those tools that come to mind, Graham?
Well, taking the tests.
Yeah.
I came out 100% on missions and I ended up in Nicaragua.
Be careful what test you take.
So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's super helpful. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm familiar with, there are tools you can use to discover your values. So there's plenty of them out there that not just to Google, search away, but can be, you can find through referral and other places. So thanks for reminding me of that, Graham. Appreciate that. Other ones. Anybody else willing to jump in, please?
We talked about one of the things that you'd mentioned in the video. So looking at your bank statement or your budget and, what does that say about what my values are? Are those the values I want?
Absolutely.
To be living by?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that, Maxine. I really do. I think, there's a place and a time for our ministries to convey biblical values. Like, these are what biblical values are. There's also a place and a time to provide context, to hold up a mirror and say, hey, when we do this, it might mean that we value this. Is that really what you want to value? Because at the end of the day, our choices, our decisions, our behaviors reveal to us what we value. And sometimes it takes an opportunity to step back and see how, the values that we might be operating with. And so I appreciate what you said, Maxine. Thank you.
One of the other things we talked about are that Desna really had some really great ideas, and she won't talk to them, but one of her suggestions around the budget was looking at what as a congregation or ministry we feel we're called to do in the community.
Yeah. And
then focusing our budget around that. I guess I would like some ideas as how do you draw a congregation or a group into discussing or determining what they feel they're called to do as a community, as a ministry.
I love that question. Thank you, Maxine. I'm looking at
the group. She also talked about like often building expenses are the major, we've got something is falling apart, we've got to fix it, the furnaces need replacing, and those seem to be where all of our budget, the money we get is going to either personnel expenses or budget. Or building, not budget. So to what extent does the building serve our purpose in the community? So to look at that, do we need the building? Will we need buildings after this pandemic is over?
Yeah. And what does the building say about what we value as a community? Yeah, I like that. Desna, did you want to add anything to the conversation? Those are really great, as reported by Maxine. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I didn't want to add. Maxine summed it up beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you both for sharing. Appreciate that. I'm just curious, show of hands, how many of you in your conversations talked about buildings, and our community has a building and we, and it's an ongoing expense. Yeah, I see Mary Ann's hand up. Linda's hand is up for sure. I'm sure there's others as well. It's kind of the ongoing thing, and buildings tend to be, I don't know, they tend to get a bad rap in budgets, right? Unfortunately, but I would suggest that buildings are really important, that buildings provide a ministry context and that they reflect values of community and a place to gather, and not to mention safety and stability and a chance to be generous Monday through Saturday. And I don't think buildings are always such a bad thing when it comes to church life. So for whatever it's worth, you didn't ask me for my opinion, but that is what I would say. And of course, there's more to ministry too. So Before we move on, I'm just curious, are there other ideas? Because this is one of those practical questions, like things you can do to help people understand their values, and as a way of helping people adaptively move into a healthier relationship with money. And I see some people writing notes, so I'm just curious, before we move on, what were some of the other ideas that were spurred in the conversations?
One of the other things that we talked about was enlarging the base of your congregation.
Yeah.
And in terms of values, again, identifying the skills and talents of people.
Yeah.
For instance, we want to evangelize because that's going to be a value of our congregation.
Yeah.
And as one of my group already mentioned, mission.
Yeah.
There's outreach. We do things like Vacation Bible School. And it's not about just the kids who are part of the congregation, but we outreach to young people and children who are part of the community where our church is located. So social justice, those are all values I believe a church should have. Sure. And for people to be able to work within those different areas, we have to identify who has the skills to best work, the best bring to those areas.
Thank you, Thelma. Appreciate that. I think somebody else would come off mute too. Are you Marianne? Somebody else come off mute on that one? Want to jump in?
I agree with what Sister Thelma said just now. But also in our church, we go along like if we were in a building, and we involve all the talents. We have the young people who carry the service some Sundays, and we try to involve every member in that congregation.
Yeah. And
allow them to just bring out their talents in what part they would have done in the church. And also to we know that you must pay your stewardship. You don't want to touch stewardship just the money alone. It's just that, we all involved, and with doing what you can do, your commitment and your attitudes towards serving God, it helps, it brings out everything where the stewardship, where the money is concerned.
Thank you, Gwendolyn. Appreciate that. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for everybody for participating. This is going really well, and I'm really grateful for our time together. I want to come back here to recapping where we've been. And if you recall, approach number 2 is to see money's emotional. That's not a bad thing, by the way. Money's just emotional. It's an emotional form of energy, and every emotion is a gift from God. And it's where we're denying emotions or suppressing emotions where we tend to be unhealthy. So the key is the healthy response to a wide variety of emotions that we can experience as humans, and helping people understand the underlying emotions, particularly as it relates to money and their relationship with money. So, and this is where those values come in handy. So those values are a tool for navigating the wide variety of emotions we can experience, and then calibrating to and reminding us as to what's truly important in our lives. The third approach to cultivating generous givers, if you recall from the video, is seeing generosity as freedom. And giving is an act of financial freedom, and simplicity enables generosity, vice versa. And in this point, it's less how we fund the ministry and more of a tool that we can use for discipleship and formation. And I think back to Linda's point about how stewardship has just gotten to be a word where it's become code for fundraising. I actually think fundraising is a really good thing, and I think it's okay to ask for money, but it's also like, the way that we talk about it can be more through the lens of who are we becoming? And can generosity be a way of, further becoming who we're meant to be? And it's always cliche, but it's so worth saying every single time. It's not what God wants from us, but generosity is what God wants for us. It's a form of freedom. So in this next round of breakouts, I'm just going to ask you, let's do a 5-minute breakout. We'll keep it super short. Do you agree or disagree that generosity helps an individual to grow a healthier relationship with money? So I'll recreate our rooms here, and we'll hop back in. Again, this will be a short 5-minute breakout, and we'll pull us back in and hear what you have to say about agree or disagree to that prompt. to know, do you agree? Agree or disagree? Generosity can be a tool that we can use to have a healthier relationship with money. Where did this conversation take you? Please hop in.
We
Vince. Oh, go ahead, Charlie. We'll go Charlie, and then I'll put Vince on the spot.
Our group all agreed that giving does help us have a better relationship with money, in that it creates this positive emotion, this joy that's related to that giving, and within lies the freedom that we discuss.
Yeah, I love that. Definitely a jolt of joy with giving. Appreciate that, Charlie. Pastor Charlie. Vince, how about you? Oh, you're on mute still.
You're still on mute, Vince.
I was in the same group as Charlie, and so we had the same discussion. But I've noticed the joy in seeing my own sons grow up and go out on their own, and what I can do for them, and how much joy it brings, and also the same feeling when you can do something for ministry or your congregation, do something above and beyond.
Yeah.
Like a tithe or a pledge, just go beyond, and how that is so meaningful.
Thanks, Vince. Appreciate that.
And ask Charlie about his sermon on Sunday.
The one that he gave, or the one coming up?
The one coming up. The scripture is very appropriate.
I had noted that I think it's interesting that we're celebrating stewardship when the upcoming gospel text for Sunday is the rich man from Mark 10.
Yeah.
Give everything you own to the poor and follow me.
Yes. Yes. So you're taking sermon notes as we speak here.
Just a
little bit. Hey, that's all right. It's fair game. That's what you do. That's what you do. Bill, I'd love to hear from you. What came up in your conversation? Would you mind sharing, coming off mute and sharing?
There, I unmuted by myself. So the heck with what everybody else said. I'm sitting here thinking, let's cut your question the other direction. If your question is correct, how to have a healthy relationship with money, then there must be an unhealthy relationship with money. And I think that money is one of the major idols of our culture. Yeah. And so then we need to at least talk about and admit that there is an unhealthy way to have money. I know it's better to use honey than vinegar. I get that, I understand that, but I just think it's also needed to sometimes talk about the unhealthy things and what happens when we have that unhealthy relationship. You know, we should talk about debt, and debt is like being not enslaved, but in bondage to something. Yeah. And how it restricts our lives and cuts off our future.
Absolutely.
Now, I should specify that the people in my group, they did say some very wonderful and very brilliant things in response to the question. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Bill. Thanks so much. I appreciate you jumping in there. I agree. There's definitely an opportunity to talk about how money and the worship of money can become idolatrous, for sure. Absolutely. And it's crazy. We live in the wealthiest nation to ever exist. And our relationship with money is, for many of us as a culture, is completely out of whack. So totally agree. There's definitely an opportunity and a chance to have that conversation, for sure. Yep. Thanks, Bill. I appreciate that. So the three new approaches that I put in front of you and I propose humbly was seeing values as a tool, and that money is emotional and generosity is a form of freedom. I'm also under no illusion that, we have ministries to run and we do have buildings to take care of, and we do have stewardship and fundraising goals. And I actually don't think those are bad things. Those are good things, good things. And so I put in front of you this question: how can we increase giving this month, right? Like, if this is part of your ministry context and the question that you're asking, What's that lever that we can pull? And in what I've read and in my experience is that people give money when they aren't asked. And when they're asked in a really specific way, when it's done relationally, when it's done personally, when it's one-on-one, and when that ask includes a story and there's a mission centered and specific numbers go a long way. This is how people give. This is what will increase giving in your context. Of course, there's some things that need to be true to get to the point where you can have a relationship with somebody to ask them. And you have to have a mission as a congregation and as a ministry. And you have to have stories that show that that mission is alive and well and that lives are being changed, communities are being improved. But at the end of the day, you'll have to ask. And so there's the question behind the question of how does asking someone for money make you feel? And then, of course, we can go a layer deeper. What is the adaptive challenge that is underlying that challenge if that is not something that makes you feel so good? So that's where we're going in this last breakout group, asking for money. It's October 4th, 2021. You are at a conference on stewardship, and now you're going to be talking to people from around the country about asking for money. We don't get to do this that often. This is an amazing moment in time, and so I'm just going to invite you to embrace it with everything that you have. We'll do 10-minute breakouts to really get after this topic. I'll pull you back in, and then we'll do some closing thoughts. I cannot wait to hear what you have to say about this topic of asking for money. Right. Well, welcome back. Asking for money. Right? I mean, how does that make you feel? Where do those conversations go for you? Is that part of your practice? Could it be? What would that be like? I'd love to hear.
We talked about the need to be transparent. And if there's a need, if people don't know there's a need, they're not going to give. So why be afraid to let people know there's a specific need?
Yeah, absolutely. And Matthew, what did you make of doing it in person, one-on-one? I mean, are there individuals or families in your congregation that if you were on a Zoom call with them or over coffee with them and you could let them know that need transparently, that they would give? Is it on your radar at all?
Well, we really didn't talk about the one-on-one, but we were talking about just make it known to the whole congregation. But yeah, I haven't really ever had to go to anybody individually, but I guess I could if there was something. Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Thanks, Matthew. Other thoughts in addition to that? Asking for money relationally, one-on-one. Thelma.
Well, I can ask, but it depends on why I'm asking, what I'm asking for.
Yeah.
And I have to be pretty convicted.
Yeah.
For the reason, whatever that reason is that I'm asking.
Yep.
I have to be pretty convicted about it.
How do you know when you're convicted? What is that like? What's it feel like?
That I'm passionate about something. And I'll give you one example is that in the early days of fellowship, we had a building fund.
Yeah.
And I had no qualms about asking any and everybody for money to help us to get a building because of its importance to the ministry of our congregation.
Yeah.
So for me, it really depends on why I'm asking and how I feel about the reason for asking. But I also have a real problem with generally asking for money in church, because I always feel that there is some form of a deficit to me as a member of a congregation and perhaps to the congregation in general. I feel like this constant asking for money takes away from the ministry we are really called to do, because all we keep doing for me, it's like fundraising.
Mhm.
And that's one of my issues
Yeah.
in the church.
And when you say asking for money, are you talking about from the pew on Sunday, or from the stage and from the front on Sunday morning? Or are you talking about relationally one-on-one? Like which form of that?
Well, relationally, because there's so many fundraisers.
Mm.
And without the fundraisers, you have a problem of keeping the budget, the church's budget, because not everybody is pulling their weight in terms of pledges or tithes or whatever. So to supplement the operating budget, there's constant fundraising.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I haven't joined the church. This is not what my faith is about. I don't want to keep asking people for money for my church.
Tim, you talked about a building and how important it is. And in some of my breakout groups, we talked about the whole budget going towards the foundation of that building.
Mhm.
And I think I wouldn't have a problem with asking money in order to support the utilities and the mortgage and the fair share and whatnot, if I knew that building were being used outside of the First Moravian Church members.
Yeah.
And we haven't had those discussions. How can we be using our building
Yeah.
to provide ministry?
I like it, Marion. I mean, you just did it right there. You just asked the question. I think if you were to ask that question to some other folks in your context and in your congregation, you would get some pretty interesting answers. And before you would know it, you'd have a task force, a group of people who are like on fire to ask new questions. Like, we have this building, and it's really great. We're always asking for money for it. What if it could be an expression of generosity to our community? And then before you know it, you're brainstorming with a group of people and you're writing a proposal and you're getting the council on board, and like it could be a really amazing thing. And then you're generating stories of how people are using that building. Maybe there's an after school program that's using it, and now like there's actual life change that's happening in an after school program. Maybe there's an addiction recovery group that's meeting now on Thursday nights in the building, and you've got stories of changed lives there. There's all kinds of ways that our buildings can be used in our communities for needs that then provide us the stories that show that we're on mission and that it's not just fundraising to keep lights on. This is actually something that we do in our community. And guess what? If our building left, there would be a group of people who would miss us. So of course we're going to ask for money. I like that question, Marion. I really do. And so my challenge to you would be, I would be really surprised if you couldn't find other people in your context who are asking the same question. And I think if you were to do some one-on-ones and to poke around a little bit and see who else is asking that same question, you'd find some really, really amazing conversations are just waiting to happen.
And I'll jump in and add one step that might be helpful as you look at space, as well as sort of value alignment and everything. When our church was going through a visioning process, we hosted a community leader forum. And so the mayor came and the head of school system came, and the sheriff, I mean, a variety of leaders in our community. We were so thankful they all said yes, but we were able to listen to them and talk about the needs. Head of our United Way came as well. What are the needs in the Winston-Salem community, and how do you all see a church like ours helping meet some of those needs? And that might be a way, as you're trying to think about using space differently, or sort of what are our church's values and how does that transition into the world in terms of what we do for ministry, taking time to listen to those kind of folks, even if it's just a little team, like Tim just said, going out to meet with them and them not coming to the church. However, I think that step to listen might spark some new ways that you're feeling called to use gifts and to align values with what you're doing with time, talent, and treasure.
Thanks, Laura. We have time for one or two more comments on this topic of asking for money. I'm curious what other people had to say.
I would have a challenge asking individuals in the congregation for money.
Can you say that again, Desna? You would find it challenging?
Yes.
Yeah. Why so?
There's this whole idea of persons feeling as if because they give a particular amount towards a project, they can dictate how the project goes and what's done with it. And I think therein lies my challenge. Right. Persons should not feel that this is my project or this, I've given X amount of money so I can say what happens here. And I think when we do that, when we ask specific individuals, we just may run the risk of that happening.
Got it. So Desna, just to clarify, there's a risk of that happening, or is that actually happening?
I've seen it happen before, and I'm not sure if that's a healthy way to go about raising money for projects in the church.
Yeah, I mean, there's your next sermon idea, and Charlie, maybe you can put this in your sermon. Is Charlie still with us? You put this on your sermon for Sunday. That if you make a financial gift and you've got expectations for how to use it, it's no longer a gift. It's not a gift. It's not a gift. Letting go of control is part of letting go of that dollar, and that's preachable. And that's something that we all need to hear now and then, because we all have expectations for how something is, used if we give it. And like, wait a minute, I gave it away. It's no longer mine, and I'm going to trust the people that are stewarding it now. But Desna, I also would say too that, if people have, what I hear you saying is that people have expectations and like, they didn't want to just give money and then and goodbye. Like it might come with energy for implementing those ideas too. It might come with an opportunity to contribute some wisdom and some time and, hey, don't just ask me for $50. Like I would love to show up for that initiative. Right. And, it's been said that if you ask people for money, you get ideas, but if you ask them for ideas, you get money. So you can never go wrong by asking people for their ideas. Ask people for their opinions on how something should be done as a way of going to the conversation for funding those important initiatives. You should have pretty good luck with that. Friends, we're at 4:30 in my time, 5:30 for a lot of you, and I want to be respectful of our time. Totally can hang out for a little bit. I'm just going to put my email address in the chat. Please reach out if you have any questions, comments at all. Would love to keep in touch. I had a blast. Thank you to Laura and Chris for the invitation to be a part of this with you all. Thank you for being engaged on a Zoom call. Thank you for your smiles and your engagement in the small groups and reporting out. You all were wonderful, and it made my job very enjoyable. Thank you for your ministries and all you're doing to figure out ministry right now in this crazy world we live in. I'm grateful for all of you. Thanks. Be well.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Thanks, Maxine. Thanks, Marion.
Thank you.
Thelma. Thanks, Gay. Thanks, Gwendolyn.
It was a very informative presentation. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Very welcome.
Bye.
Yes, you give us a lot of food for thought.
Thanks, Thelma. Appreciate that. Be well.
You
We'll see
too.
y'all tomorrow at some of our other sessions.
11 o'clock. Hi, Sister Laura.
We'll see you tomorrow.
See you in the morning. Bye.
There needs to be a name for the dynamic that happens where all the really fun, most interesting questions come in the last 5 minutes. What is that called?
Exactly. Well, and I know, so Desna, she and her husband both are pastors, and she
Okay.
serves at 2 different churches in New York. He serves at one. They're going to be on our panel Wednesday to talk about
great.
stewardship. I'm excited. They're both just really cool. But we've talked a little bit about cultural differences and attitudes about money, and it's been really interesting. But I know that Moravian churches don't do a lot of individual type stuff. It's everything's, and I know in my church, it's like, who knows how much money is given? Nobody wants to know. So it's interesting. I love that you threw that in there, because I was like, ooh, I want to see what people say, because I know they're all calling me to help them ask for money. So I'm like, I know you all have thoughts on this.
Totally. Yep, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Laura. Enjoy your evening.
You as well.
Enjoy
I'll
the
be in
rest of the week.
touch.
Sounds
Okay.
great.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Take care.